17 years, to school for learning kids with differentiated learning needs. I'm on the board of trustees for Denver Academy, where Philippe is one of our deans and one of our best teachers. And also have a private practice doing groups with kids, social skills groups, as well as individual and family therapy. Philippe and I wrote an article together a year and a half back on emotional impairments, which we're talking about today. I came at it from the parents' perspective, working with parents, and from the social perspective. So how does this impact our students in the social environment? Philippe will come at it from a teacher perspective. How does this impact the classroom? So we're going to take a look at how those three areas get impacted, and then solutions or steps to take to help mediate those emotional responses. I also come at it from a personal perspective. Since we're talking about emotions today, one of those is going to be anxiety. I'm actually going to read in front of you. Now, the reason that's anxiety-producing for me is in first grade, my lovely first grade teacher said, okay, children, we're going to have reading groups. And she read about, 15% of the names, and she said, you children are the monkeys. And then she read about 60% of the names, 70%, and she said, you guys are the giraffes. And then I was still sitting there with two of my buddies, and she read our names, and she said, and you're in the turtle reading room. Now, I knew I was slow in reading. I didn't miss the connection. But was that really a warm fuzzy that inspired me to read? No. I pretty much checked out at that point. My emotional defenses to just survive the experience was boys play Army after school, and they play football. They don't read. And that's sort of how I survived getting through those elementary years. And I'll be even a couple of stories after that. I want to have Philippe come up to introduce himself. I can't tell you personally, having heard him speak and teach, if I had had him in middle school and high school, my academic trajectory would have started much earlier than it did. Finally took off in college, but he would have gotten me on the track much sooner. So, Philippe.
Thanks very much, Craig. Thank you very much for your kind words. We're used to kind of like basements and potlucks, so this is really nice. Thanks for coming today. Beautiful people in the room. I appreciate it. Very honored to represent Denver Academy and to be working with Craig Nippenberg. Our Director of Education is also in the house, so that I appreciate that. Again, Philippe Bernawine, I started my path on education with Teach for America. I had an opportunity to talk to a few of you. There may be some alums in the room right now, and that is fantastic. I've been at the Denver Academy coming up on 17 years in a variety of positions, and currently as the Dean of Faculty, Training and Development, and this opportunity to write the article with Craig was just absolutely great. It really solidified some of the classroom practices that I had intuitively been doing. I had been doing them kind of out of need because I had to do them because the needs that the students were showing up with kind of needed to be addressed. I'll talk about that a bit more. So if you'll allow me to go into teacher mode, if you could get out your booklet. If you don't have a booklet, just something to write with. And to kind of set our mind right now, think about a student or a situation where as a parent or as an administrator or as an educator, you had a student whose emotional needs greatly exceeded, right, those academic needs or what was going on in the classroom. It's important that we really pick a very specific name, a person, somebody that we can come back to kind of throughout our hour together this morning. Does that sound all right? So you're writing right now for 1 minute. I'm going to time it. There's no wrong answer. Start now. Where are my extroverts? When I got to meet a few of you prior, I know somebody's visiting from Holland. I won't call out my Holland colleague. But who are you thinking about right now? So we'll have 2 or 3 to share out, really a name, and what did that look like? So right up front, we'll start here, and then back row, get ready. I see you. Thank you.
My son, Eddie. ADP, initial diagnosis of ADHD. When he was 15, we found out that it was really kind of more on the very high end of the asthma.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. So we have Eddie. Eddie's name is out there. We're thinking about your son. Can I get 2 more to share it? Who are you thinking about? Were the emotional needs? And the gentleman with the hat, we kind of spent study hall here this morning together. Can you speak up a little bit?
So I have a student named Ricky, who is Native American. She's an alcoholic. She is a child of extramarital affair, and her father and her brother are in prison for life for raping and murdering the younger while committing
Thank you for sharing that. So we'll keep kind of her in mind as we go through and look at what strategies can we help individuals like this when these students are in our classrooms or they're kind of in our responsibility and really our collective care. Can I get one more? Thank you.
Yeah, I have a young lady named Tia, and her mother's a prostitute. She basically took care of her mother and her sister. She did have to have sex to get food for her sister. This is middle school. She had an abortion at 11. She is currently living in the girls' home. So,
What was her name? Tia?
Tia.
Well, if I wasn't, I was motivated prior to today. Okay? But if I wasn't motivated prior to today, I definitely am now, because what Craig and I want to share is ways we can effectively respond to, I think, individuals like the names that have been shared. We have a spectrum here. Right? We really have a continuum of examples, but I want us to keep those individuals in mind and obviously who you're thinking about.
Yes. As we did the exercise, I thought about my group yesterday. Now, I have 12 children in the group, 4th, 5th, 6th graders. Oh, that light is penetrating, isn't it? And we had just played a game. About 8 or 10 of the kids have ADHD. I've got 5 with either primary OCD or comorbid OCD along with their ADHD. We finished our game. Our educational experience was to think back to each group member over the last 4 or 5 months and ask them a question about something they've shared personally about themselves. So is a good skill in relationships the ability to remember things about people, right? And ask them. That's a wonderful skill. Well, unfortunately, just as we started, our wonderful Colorado skies went from light blue to really dark gray. And 5 of those kids, it's a fairly common phobia in Colorado, storm anxiety. We have a lot of lightning. So if you're not from here, every summer afternoon, those clouds roll over and there's lightning bouncing everywhere. So they immediately started looking out the windows, obsessing, and then the hail broke out, followed up by a tornado warning. So we all went down into the room. You can imagine for the next 20 minutes, it was absolute chaos, trying to get everybody to settle down. One little girl's like, "That's a different kind of siren." I'm like, "No, I think that's the over siren. I think it's over now." No, I'm sure it's going on. Everybody just all agitated. And also at the end of the group, I thought to myself, we should come from the therapist perspective, because I really need a martini right now after that whole deal, right? So we really didn't get our lesson finished, so we'll be working on that next week. Now, before we turn to the paragraph I'm going to read, I want to just mention a couple underlying foundations that are important to keep in mind as you're working with students, children, patients, your own children. They're not in the handout, so you just have to jot them down. But first of all, the importance of thinking about a statement. And the statement goes like this: we don't have ADHD kids. We have kids with ADHD, okay? The most fundamental points for me, I've been doing it for 32 years, is I stay focused on the child. They're a kid like any other kid, same needs, same desires, same wants. I want to target that child as a child. Their symptoms interfere with their success, but I don't want that to become the primary way of seeing that child. And that can often happen pretty easily. So you really want to avoid letting that happen for you. Secondly, the symptoms, some of these symptoms for ADHD, for your LD kid, like for myself as a turtle, as a dyslexic student, the emotional impairments are secondary symptoms. So to have dyslexia, what's the primary problem you have? Phonics, right? Reading phonics. I do a little reversals, not too much, but phonics doesn't work for me, okay? The emotions then were built on top of that. Over time, though, which becomes the bigger impairment? The emotions. My emotions were much bigger detriment to me than my actual phonics difficulties. Social skills for ADHD kids. For the average child, if you went in any school, 7% of your students total have severe social skill deficits. Now, if you just looked at ADHD kids, guess what the figure is? 80%. 80% of ADHD kids have severe social skill deficits. One of my favorite studies was done by Bill Pelham out at the University of Pittsburgh with his synthesis program. They did a 3-month summer camp for all sorts of kids, a mixed group of children in a summer camp.
And one of the questions was, how long would it take observers to diagnose the ADHD kids just by observing them? So they didn't know their histories, they didn't read any of their testing reports, they just watched them. What do you think? How long do you think it took? 2 minutes, yeah, you've been in the trenches. 5 hours, within 5 hours. 3-month camp, within 5 hours, they could pick out the kids. Primarily related to their level of aggression and what I like to call being a prickly pear, right? So you're standing in line, getting on the bus, and some other kid comes in. What's the ADHD kid do? Hey, that's my spot, you know, you're in my spot. Or do they notice there's a line? No, they hear somebody say, get on the bus, they just right in there, right? Getting upset over the seat. So within 5 hours, you could pick those kids out. So it's a secondary symptoms. Now, with some severe anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, then that emotional piece is going to become more of a primary problem, issue. But a lot of our kids, it's the secondary thing. Also important to keep in mind is coordination with everyone in the school, right? So if you're coming up with a behavior plan with a teacher, do all the specialists need to know about that? Yes. Some of the people that don't get included, substitutes, right? I had a little girl, Carrie Ann, 20 years ago. The teacher agreed not to use a red pen on her misspelling, okay? Do you remember the red pen? I used to get a lot of red pen, including from my mother, who in college, when I would write home, would send the letters back to me with the misspelled words. Now, it really didn't motivate me to write much. You know, it really trimmed down my writing to Mom. But the old red pen. Now, Carrie Ann was doing great. One day the substitute came, and guess what the substitute didn't know about? The red pen. She used the red pen. Carrie Ann went home in tears. Everyone has to know. A study out in California by Jim Swanson, they trained everyone in the district on how to do behavior plans. They implemented the behavior plans. Then they went back and looked at who was the most important person in either making or breaking the behavior plan. And they found 2 people. They found, guess who it was? What I hear? Cafeteria. You're on the right track. The playground aide and the bus driver. Okay? Now, what do they have in common? It's fairly unstructured. Now, you're hoping the bus is structured, but I've been on some buses where it really wasn't very structured. But that playground aide and the school bus driver, they're the ones in the trenches. Do they often get included in trainings? No. Right, they're not included. Another beginning point is coming from the child's needs base. So very often as teachers, clinicians, parents, the kids making noises. Dad says, would you stop that? You're driving me crazy. Or you're bothering your sister. If I'm a junior high ADD guy, what am I thinking now? Oh yeah, I got power, right? I'm going to keep knocking that thing forever. Somehow, somebody's got to relate to me about, geez, if I have some of these behaviors and I don't manage them, I could lose my friends, right? I could have difficulty with my friendships. I haven't been invited to a birthday party since 1st grade. I'd like to go to a birthday party. Maybe there's a reason. So it's coming from their needs base. I saw an 8th grader last night who has just done phenomenally. He's one of the top students. He goes to a Montessori school. His principal said to him, you were the wildest preschooler, 1st and 2nd grader we've ever had in this school. And now he's this delightful, mature young man. I mean, he completely changed. I remember seeing him in 1st grade. He completely changed his trajectory. And I said to him, how did you do it? And he looked at me and said, somewhere about 3rd grade, I realized that I didn't have any friends. And I wanted to have friends. That's what made the switch flip for him. And hopefully lots of support. I'm hoping I helped him out some. But he made that switch and came from his own needs base. And finally, the last foundation is the idea of repetition and practice. You go over it, you go over it, you go over it. I have never had a kid come out of one of my groups and say to his mom, when Mom says, what did you learn today? And he says, well, I learned this and this, and I'm going to do it every day from now on. That doesn't happen, right? The next week, we might have to go over the same concept again. And it's like a new light bulb going on again, right? Even though we've gone over it 4 or 5 times. Lots of repetition and practice. I'm just looking for incremental developmental steps. Now, turning to our next PowerPoint. In our article, we wanted to focus on who the kids we're talking about. So I'm just going to read it in case you can't see it in the back. And this is my risk at reading to you.
bipolar disorder, and OCD, process their emotions in often more intense, more impulsive, and more life-inhibiting manners than those students without diagnosed exceptionalities. Exceptional children have a stronger reactivity to environmental stimuli. These amygdala-driven responses take their toll on the families, the classroom, peer relationships, and the individual's own sense of self, and result in failed relationships and failed academic attainment. Now, a simpler way to understand it is my Winnie the Pooh riddle. So Winnie the Pooh decides to go for a walk in the forest one day. And he's walking through the woods and he trips over a rock. What does Winnie the Pooh say? Oh, bother. But there's honey in the tree. And he gets up and he continues on his walk. How does he feel? Happy. So he's able to sustain an environmental stimuli, the rock. Does he drop a little bit? A little frustrated. But he quickly regains his composure and his emotional happiness. He can hold on to happiness. Piglet's walking through the woods. Piglet trips over a rock. What does Piglet say? Remember the little pig guy? What's he have a lot of? Anxiety, right? The kid said to me, well, Mr. Hindenburg, if you were this little thing, you blew away in the wind, you'd be anxious too. Yes, I would. Piglet would say, oh no, I better go home. There's going to be more rocks. I'll get hurt. I have to go home. And he would skip his walk and scurry back home. If Rabbit trips over the rock, what's Rabbit going to feel? Angry. He's the angry guy. Rabbit's going to pick up the rock and say, stupid rock, and throw it. And the rest of the walk, what's he going to do every time he sees a rock? Kick it, throw it, yell at it. He's going to be mad the entire time. Now, if Eeyore comes along, what's Eeyore going to say? Oh, even the rocks don't want to be my friend. And he'll walk along, and he'll look at another rock and say, he doesn't want to be my friend either. Right? He's got that sadness he can't get rid of. Now, if Tigger falls over the rock, what's Tigger say? Yeah, that's sweet! And Tigger's going to run back around, do it again, roll all over the place, and purposely roll off every rock along the path. Right? He's got your kind of ADHD kind of guy. Right? Now, I've never had an owl in, but I'll give it a shot at it. Owl, if you had to pick a diagnosis for owl, what would you think? Where would you put it? The autism spectrum disorder. He's got like nonverbal range. So he would probably give a discussion on what kind of rock it is. Right? And it would go on for 45 minutes, and the other characters would be like, oh, and he would have no clue about what everybody else is feeling. Right? He would get into his head. He would feel that side of the That's the first time I worked that one. Kids pointed that out to me. So those are the kids we're looking at. Next slide. Today we're talking about that emotional piece, but I'd like to put it in sort of a bigger cycle. So when you look at the emotional response, it's sort of, so that's our third piece, third circle. What comes before that and what comes after that? Now I've modified this from John Rady, who was here in Denver, 20 years ago. It just co-authored Driven Distraction and Speaking. He called it his cycle of anger. And I began to think about it and felt, well, actually, it's more than just anger. This covers all these different emotions. And sort of the process that exceptional kids use when they're falling down on a rock, right? Or having a problem. So our first step in the cycle is, does the problem exist? Right? So even being aware of that there could be a problem. Now, for your student in the classroom, if you don't hear the teacher, who do you use to guide you sometimes? Your peers, right? George Washington read a book that said, when others sitteth, thou shalt sitteth. Right? Now, if you don't do nonverbal well, do you miss out on the cues around you? So a couple of weeks ago, I'm talking to a 5th grade teacher. The other students got up to leave to go to science, and the girl had been doodling. She's a bit distracted. She was doodling. The other children left, and her teacher looked at her and said, honey. And she looked up, looked around, and she said, I guess I'm not supposed to be here. I'm like, yeah, the class left 5 minutes ago, right? Totally missing the nonverbal. The memory issues, the working memory issues. So the kid leaves the classroom thinking, I've got to take my math book home today. I have to have my math book. goes to the locker, opens the locker, grabs the math book, puts it on top of the locker, is looking for some other stuff. His buddy comes up and says, come on, lacrosse practice is starting in 5 minutes. We got to hurry. Grabs his lacrosse stick, grabs his pack, takes off. Where's the math book? On top of the locker. Gets home, gets in the car with Mom. Mom says, do you have your math book today? And what's he say? Yeah. Because where does he think it is? He thinks it's in his bag, right? Is it? No, it's back at school. They go home, they unpack the pack. Mom's like, where's your math book? What's the kid say? I don't know. It was in there. Did you touch it when I was in lacrosse practice? I got my sister looked in my bag again, and it's probably somewhere else. She lost my book, right? Totally unaware that there's a problem, okay? Or I'm listening to the teacher in math, and she says, okay, students, turn to page 12, do problem 16.3. Now, hopefully, I got my math book out, but in the middle of her saying that, I started thinking, I wonder if his beard always had grades. Sorry, I know this guy here. Then he hears 18. So he opens his math book. He turns to page 18. What page was it? 12, right? The teacher comes by and says, you're supposed to be on page 12. What's the kid say? No, I'm not. You said 18. I heard you say 18. No, I said page 12. He continues to argue, right? Totally missing that there's a problem. Often, when they are aware of it, their perceptions of the problem are very limited. So a big one is hyper-defensiveness. When you're playing games in sports, does incidental contact happen? Yes, all the time, right? You run into each other. For the exceptional child, how do they do it? You pushed me. You're pushing me, right? I've not met an exceptional kid yet who said to me, that was the best reffing job I've ever seen. You were totally fair. Every call was spot on, right? It's like every call was bad. You know, it's, oh no, it didn't happen, right? So quick to react. In the article we wrote, and we have a copy of it, there's a story of a boy named Evan who got stuck on the one of the boys who picked him to be goalie. And he's sure that the other boy didn't think he was the best goalie, and that's why he didn't pick him. Later after the group, when we processed it, Philippe's going to talk about how to process things. We asked the boy who was the captain, he said, how come you didn't pick Justin? Or Evan in the story. And Evan said, Evan was like for sure that he didn't pick him because he was no good. The captain said, well, the girl raised her hand first, and my mom said, always treat women first and give them what they need first. And I was just trying to be gentle. I'm like, that's so sweet. The other kid responded in this intense emotional display. If you've got the 7th grade boy who comes home, he says, Mom, can we go to Dairy Queen this afternoon? And Mom says, sure, honey. After you finish your homework, if your sister's home on time, if I can get dinner cooked, we can go. What did that kid just do? We're going to dinner, right? And we'll talk about it in a second. With that one, a lot of their emotions are related to their own gratification. A lot of my kids, their goal is to see the big picture. Whose picture do they want to see? Their own, right? So life is like a stained glass window. You're supposed to see all the other pieces that make up the big picture. They often just see the one that has their name on. For the ASD kids, a lot of times, when they're dealing with problems, they're very rule-bound, have to do things in a certain way, and if you get out of those rules, their pattern of doing it, you really see it all the time. So step 3, that emotional over-responsiveness, frustration, anger, and anxiety are the big ones. Over time, what else kicks in? Sadness, right? Depression, right? If you look at alcohol and drug use patterns for adolescents with ADHD, their abuse patterns often mirror those of students with depression. Do they get tired of hearing it over and over, year after year after year? ADHD kids get 10 times the negative feedback as other kids in the classroom. So for every negative somebody gets, Johnny gets 10. Is that going to take a toll on him emotionally? Pretty soon he shuts down, and he's got depression as well. The reactions are often very quick to respond. I'm doing a talk on Saturday for ADHD college students, LD college students about social relationships, and one of the recommendations is slow down your responses. Not everybody responds as fast as you do. So if your spouse or girlfriend says, this is how I'm feeling, don't come back at them right away with your So it's often very intense and very quick. The little DQ example, that was a true story. This boy, Michael, second grader, comes downstairs 20 minutes later and says, "Mom, are you going to Dairy Queen now?" And Mom says, "Well, you didn't finish your homework yet, and your sister's not home, and I'm still cooking." What does he say? "What do you mean? You promised. You promised we were going." Throws pitches a big fit, and calls his mother, as a second grader, a scum-sucking bottom dweller. At that point, his delightful mother, which I didn't even know existed for second graders, sends him up to his room. Okay? So he's had that big, quick response. He also doesn't appreciate how his mom's feeling, right? So if you get in trouble, aren't you supposed to sort of think about, if somebody gives you negative feedback, you're supposed to think about, how did I make them feel? 20 minutes later, Michael comes down, and what's he say to his mom? "Are we going to Dairy Queen now?" Mom's looking, well, she's red-eyed, and says, how can you think that? Don't you see how I'm feeling? And little Michael, true story, says to his mom, "Is it PMS?" Now, where do you think he heard that? I'm thinking Dad has said that a few times, right? So totally his gratification, his needs, big response, doesn't respond to how you're feeling, and can't really understand. Here in Colorado, after Columbine, we had kids the very same day, next day, recess. What did they play? Shooting games. When they got in trouble, could they understand why? No. Could they understand the grief of the playground system and the teachers? Probably this is not appropriate. After 9/11, what were they doing on the playground? Airplanes, flying airplanes, right? Or after Columbine, two boys got in trouble, they were debating and arguing about what kind of bomb it was, right? Don't really see how others are going to feel in these situations. The title of the article is "The Feeling du Jour." It's the feeling of the moment, right? And those feelings can switch on and off. 1 minute we're intense, the next minute we're happy, right? And switch. Next one, we don't follow a step-by-step plan for solving, right? It's sort of a shotgun approach to solving problems in life versus more of a step-by-step process. Very often, academically, how many of your special needs kids forget to put their name on the paper? Constantly, right? They do it, they get it in their backpack, hopefully, they take it to school, but it doesn't happen. They don't put it in the basket, right? 2 months later, where do they find it? In the backpack, somewhere buried or maybe in the locker. So don't follow the step-by-step process, don't finish it. Time management is a fundamental skill, the ability to manage time. So there are some students and the teachers, when mom says, they do the whole thing, when mom says the bus is coming in 5 minutes, some kids do well. They calculate how long 5 minutes is. They figure out what they need to do. They hustle up if they're behind, and they're ready. The special needs kid, the exceptional child, what do they do? "Oh, okay, I'm going to get my shoes." We're on the stairs going to get our shoes. Hey, look. I haven't seen this water jug in 6 months. I wonder what happened to it. Look. Right? Comes down 5 minutes later, got one shoe on, no socks, and mom's wondering what happened. Right? So we kind of get lost track of time. We forget what we're doing. If you look at statistically, kids with ADHD have 400 times the accidental death rate of other kids. They're the ones, when the kickball goes out across the street, what are you supposed to do? Stop. Hopefully stop first. Then look both ways. Now, from a time perspective, what does your brain need to calculate? How long before car Philippe reaches this point can I make it across the street? On average, people with ADHD are off by 50% in terms of estimation of time. If I'm off by 50%, what's going to happen to me? Right? I'm dead. ADHD teen drivers have 4 times the accidents, 4 times the tickets, 4 times the death rates of other teen drivers. They're not receiving left turns, or maybe not focused, right? So that time thing becomes the key. They also don't give feedback very well. So when you're 7th graders right now who are thinking, I want to work really hard on my study skills so I'm ready for high school. Yes, there are. There are probably girls, right? There's other guys who, if you held them back in 7th grade, it would be like 3 months into the next year before they would go, well, they were in my class last year. How come I'm with these new kids, right? They wouldn't catch on. You're not making that connection between positives or the negatives, right? Not thinking about, well, what could happen if I do this or don't do this. It's just act, really don't think about the consequences. And finally, they end up becoming prisoners of the moment. Abraham Lincoln said, unless we understand the past, we're bound to repeat it. Now, if you make enough mistakes, if you lose control of your emotions enough, if you stumble in your reading, do you want to take risks anymore? No. If you do make a mistake and somebody says, why did you do that? Or what about this? What are you going to say? I didn't do it. Not me. Wasn't me. Right? We end up long. We feel shame. We try to hide it. We don't want to talk about it. Now, if the child doesn't talk about it or think about it, can they ever change? No. One of the simple discipline techniques I like for this, I'm going to turn it back over to Philippe. For parents, you can use it in the classroom. I use it in my groups all the time. If a child has a consequence for something, if they admit it and talk to you about it, the consequence is cut in half, or no consequence at all. If they don't, and they continue to stonewall you and blame everybody else, the consequence is double. At a group, we do a point system. We earn points and we lose points. If a kid raises their hand and say, hey, I lost a point today because I was getting too upset about the storm, they would lose 1 point, but they earn 2 back for the group because they took responsibility. And for every kid, you want them to understand, everybody gets it if you make mistakes. If you take responsibility, will people forgive you? Yes, they'll forgive you. If you don't, they won't. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Philippe, and we'll jump into the journal.
I could listen to Craig all day. We've done this a number of times together, and I learned something new every single time. Let's think back for a moment to Eddie and Tiana. Was it Tia? Tia. And to think, you know, in that moment, right, in that moment of being a prisoner of the moment, and that's kind of where I want to hang out at that last bubble. Like, how do we get the students out of that being a prisoner of the moment? Always being doomed to really repeat what you've done before and not have that moment of reflection, that kind of moving the self off of the self, which is critical if there's going to be a new pattern that's developed. What's it going to feel like to be that student right now? Getting that negative feedback, being a prisoner in the moment. Where are my extroverts?
Defensive.
Thank you. Maybe defensive, right? They're going to be more like a rabbit. They're going to throw that rock. What else are they going to be feeling?
He doesn't understand.
Right. Maybe say more about that.
Eddie,
Yeah,
doesn't understand what he did wrong sometimes.
Right. So he's really locked in that moment. I mean, he's absolutely, and in a way, this is where it's the teachable moment. A bit of a cliche, but that's the teachable moment. Like, how do we harness that? Sometimes when we have 30 other students in the classroom, I realize that. I'll get to that, I promise. We're going to talk about overlapping and what an effective strategy can look like so we can kind of get that out of jail free card, to get out of that moment. Anybody else? One more emotion. What might it feel like to be a student in that moment?
Helpless, frustrated.
Frustrated, helpless? Okay. So I want to tell you just a brief story about Micah. Micah was one of my 9th grade students. He had just come to the Denver Academy and had been doing well, but it was not yet consistent. And on a Tuesday, he came in, hair uncombed, a little bit late, bleary-eyed, and kind of shuffling. He kind of came in the classroom shuffling. So he's coming in Eeyore style. Are you with me? Very low energy, very much nobody likes me. I don't want to be here. Then, of course, I am the instructional leader in the classroom. It's my responsibility to be teaching about conjunctions and subordinating clauses, and so I have to ask him for his homework. I just noticed all the teachers in the room. Homework, you're with me. I know who you are now. So of course I say, Micah, where is your homework? And we go from Eeyore to Rabbit. What do you mean homework? I don't need it. You're bothering me. You called my mom about it. I did it. I just forgot it at home. It's like, wow. I mean, on a dime, right? He goes from being super low energy to being just absolutely angry, outrageous. Now he's disrupting the rest of the class. You know, what do I do now? There were other students in the classroom. I'm pretty sure they wanted to learn. We were reading John Krakauer's Into the Wild at the time. It was a big hit. And Micah actually liked the book as well, but he had this explosion because we know what he was feeling, right? I called on him. He did it, maybe, or didn't do it, or left it at home, on the kitchen table, in the car, whatever it might be. He's kind of being called out. So over the years, what I've developed, and I've had a chance to talk to Chip and a few others about this kind of prior to the session, is this idea of the journal and the power of the journal. It can be as simple as this, an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded and stapled in the middle, to something a little bit fancier. Because if I didn't have this tool, I would have also been a prisoner of the moment, right? I would have said, Micah, get out. Or go to the principal's office. Or just be quiet, I'll focus on everybody else. Which I think is a great injustice as the educator in the room. I'm responsible for all means all. So I want to give you a little bit of background on what it takes, I think, to have the journal in place, and then I'll get back to Micah and kind of walk you through what actually happened. Again, true story, a lot like the DQ, the Dairy Queen story. Really on the first day, this is a very important part of my first day lesson. Every student gets a letter from me. And it's framed as a reading, writing workshop journal. But I have had this journal used for, I need help with drugs. I don't know what to do tonight. I've just been offered drugs. Somebody has a knife. So I don't think it's an overstatement to say that this journal has saved lives. Students who were thinking about hurting themselves or others have often turned to the journal to get out of being, again, are you with me, that prisoner of the moment, because they have an outlet. My guarantee to them is that it stays private unless we're talking about hurting self or others. Then I would go get counseling, or the head of school, the disciplinarian, whatever I need. But my promise to them is that letter goes back and forth once a week in our classroom. And that's managing a classroom of 15 or 16 students. When I have 40 students, and I've done it that way too, I have a rotation of every other week. They're going to get a personal response from me. They're still writing every single week, but you can see how it kind of incrementally goes up because we only have so much time, but I set aside that time to literally write them back. My introductory letter I can share with you, it's at my website, but this introductory letter is like, hey, this is where we're going to be talking about what we're reading, thinking, feeling, wondering, what are we connecting to? I get to do a lot of reteaching through there as well, but I'd say the primary role it plays for students that we've labeled as exceptional is to help with getting out of this being a prisoner of the moment and really giving them some of the tools to really work through and reflect on that emotion. It's also a place at Denver Academy, this idea of Glasser's needs. We believe that no learning will occur unless these 5 basic core needs are met, as defined by William Glasser. The book is published in the 80s. I think it's called Control Theory in the Classroom. The exact identical book is published again in the late 90s. It's called Choice Theory in the Classroom. So you can take your pick, whatever generation you want to subscribe to. But it's good stuff. It's chapter 3. And I think the journal really says, it really helps meet these 5 basic needs, and particularly for those students who are having a hard time, maybe processing those emotions. There was a question. Go ahead.
Real quick. I assume that Michael did not go from that to the journal. You have taught the journal. You have trained them to do it. Yes.
So exactly. So we'll talk about what this technique looks like very specifically. Okay. So it's always going on, again, whether we're having behavioral, emotional issues or not. You can see this is a nice way to differentiate as well, right? Those students that maybe are getting a little bit bored with the content I'm delivering, I can do enrichment. I can kind of riff and do variations on a theme and really challenge some of those students individually through the journal. But again, back to Micah, he knows that he has to turn in once a week, and students actually love it. They come in, I actually have a mailbox. I got it at a yard sale. A real live mailbox. You know when mail came once a day? Like not every minute, on every hour, but when mail came once a day and somebody else delivered it. So it's like that. So that's where they actually put their journal. if it's on the regular rotation. Now Micah, of course, in the moment, I'm dealing with class, I got to get to John Krakauer and Into the Wild, and Why Did Chris McCandless Hate His Dad So Much? Good book, by the way, if you haven't read it. Also a good movie. Kind of one of those rare instances where that does happen. So Micah's blowing up. I remember he sat kind of left front, and I said, hey, Micah, right now I want you to turn to the journal and tell me what's going on. And so, and by the way, and over here I'm saying, let's get out our vocabulary cards to review the challenging words that are coming up in chapter 4. So there's a little bit of overlapping happening there. Now this is a big moment, right? Is Micah going to cooperate with me or not? Well, because we've had this record of, he's gotten a lot of letters from me, I've sent him personal notes, I know the music that he likes. Again, you're hearing a little bit of that differentiated instruction, right? I'm aware of his interest. I know a little bit about his readiness level. I know a lot about his learning profile. I know if I don't address this, no metaphor, no similes, nothing else is going to happen for Micah that day. So I give him the journal, and the deal is, if they hand it to me, so if my students hand me the journal in class in the moment, I prioritize it. Because now I'm trying to defuse. It's like the get out of jail free card, right? It's literally the journal is it. So I gave Mike his journal, and this is actually what he wrote. You can follow along if you want. This is in our journal. That's that first letter on page 10. And he knows that I use this, by the way, and he loves it. He's a college student now, and he's doing well. Dear Mr. E, I had so much trouble getting here today. My mom was pushing me, and I didn't want to come without my homework. I get the book we're reading, and I actually really like it. I just didn't get the assignment, and I feel like I'm disappointing everyone in my life, and my dad comes back from a business trip on Friday, and he'll be mad too. Can I stay in at lunch to do the homework? You know? And that was a real moment. Again, that's not the first time that Mike has come in, schlepping his feet and getting ready to explode at the drop. You with me? But the journal is a way that we were kind of moving him toward being more reflective in that moment. And then as I had maybe students share their vocabulary, quiz each other, I'm at the front desk and I just scribble this real quick. Hey, thanks so much for turning in the journal. I could tell you were frustrated. Teacher understatement there. We're like translating teenager, you know. I could tell you were frustrated, throwing up your arms, spitting, cursing out loud. I could tell you were frustrated this morning. Thanks for problem solving too. Yes, let's spend 15 minutes at lunch. And again, because I know that parental influence, that parental feedback is so important, I wanted to harness a good moment. Bring your cell phone or you're ever without it, and let's actually call mom right at the end, right in the moment, right after we finish those 15 minutes at lunch. And again, then mom has a better report for dad, and we're trying to rewire here in a way. But I think this journal is very simple, it's very powerful, and you know, I understand that it's been around for a long time, but I see it being used as like a it's a multi-tool. You know, it's like a Swiss Army knife. You can use it for a lot of different reasons. I think one of the best is for kind of getting students to be, you know, out of that moment, to really relinquish them from that moment. So because I mentioned Micah's mom, let's kind of hang out for a second, and then we'll transition back to Craig. What does it feel like to be this student's parent? And when we kind of say this student, we're talking about the student who's in the moment, who's frustrated, who's having failure, who's defensive. What's it going to feel like at that parent-student-teacher conference? What's it going to feel like? Actually, Micah's mom was surprised by our call. She's like, is everything okay? I knew he had a rough morning, Philippe. I wasn't sure if I should send him to school. So she's expecting what, right? Please come pick him up immediately. He's kicked out for 3 days, whatever. You know, that's not obviously what happened. But what else might it feel like to be that parent? And I know we have some parents in the room. I could ask you directly, what does it feel like? Am I sharing?
Frustrating.
Yeah, right. When what happens? Can you describe that?
Well, in mine it's mostly at home.
Yeah.
So I ask her the question, why? Why? Well, because I asked you to do it simply, but it needs to be done. She's 19 years old, she does nothing.
Yeah.
I'm like, you have a roof over your head, could you do some dishes? You know?
Right.
I mean, at first I'm asking her, can you do me a favor? Can you do the dishes? She's like, no, it's not my chore. You know, so.
And I'm sure that's immediate, right? That's like it's like almost an impulsive response. Isn't that still locked? And again, I don't mean to say that the journal is the only way we can get students out of being that prisoner of the moment. It's obviously going to be individualized. But no matter what, like key ingredient is going to be time and an opportunity to reflect and choice and security and to feel safe. And does it sound a lot like the class needs? There was another hand up. How does it feel?
It feels hopeless again because you're thinking, oh, I thought I was doing the right thing, or I tried to get them on track before I sent them off to school, and I know he was in the right spot, but, hopeless. I don't know what else to do.
So sometimes as parents or as teachers, like we're also in that prisoner of the moment, and Craig and I have talked about that, how important it is for us as educators and caregivers and parents to also have those reflective moments. There's another hand up. Thank you.
There's also some parents that are in denial. They don't want to hear what the consequences are because they may be responsible for that action.
Right. Yeah, something that's very close to home.
There's many times that the parents, there are some parents who really are just clueless about that behavior. Yeah, there are. Other times, so you get the parent, denial often goes with hope. So all summer, the parent has done the reading program, they set the kid in the right group, and what is every parent of an exceptional child hopeful for in September and August? A good year, right? And then that first phone call comes in. And how do you feel? How does the teacher feel having to make it? Every year I take a letter to the teachers saying it was about conferences and the first phone call home. And you're probably, for some of the kids, you're going to get met with anger, right? Don't respond to it. What you're getting is grief. The parent is hoping this will be the year. And it takes them a while to get over that, right? And sometimes it's that denial before finally we can kind of go, okay, it's still here, right? Statistically, parents get exceptional parents get 10 times the negative feedback from schools. Now, you want your parents, when a teacher calls, oh, what are you hoping your parents might feel? Like, oh boy, this is going to be great. What are our parents feeling? Here we go again. I did make a call for an 8th grade boy. 2 weeks ago, I lost a friend. And I was all dressed up in my best suit and tie, and I was doing a lunch club with some 8th graders. And I was going to the funeral afterwards, and the young man said to me, why are you going in a suit and tie? And I said, well, I'm going to my friend's funeral. And he just said, you must be very sad. And he talked to me for 5 minutes. Now, this little boy was one of the kids that used to have to wear one of those weighted vests when he was like in 1st grade, right? He's got no warning points and more trouble than anybody in class. And I had this incredible moment with him. I called his mother and I said, I want to give you a very warm fuzzy. And I told her all that her son did for me. Now, does that parent deny those phone calls? No. And I need those phone calls. Because that means we know for our students, if their emotions in their way, can they learn? No. For the parents, can they do the stuff they're supposed to do if their emotions are in the way? No. You have to really tap into their grief. Anything else, or should I go on the next slide? And again, always listen to you. I thought a couple of things as he was talking about the journal. Think back to the preschoolers. Do any of you work preschool and kindergartners, the young children? I get the joy of, I get to teach in a classroom from kindergarten through 8th grade. Every week, I'm in the classroom. Now, for your preschoolers and kindergartners, what's the joy when you come into the classroom at the start of the morning? What do you usually do? Morning time, circle time, right? And enjoy sitting in the carpet, and they get to talk about what happened to them and what they saw on the way to school, and maybe feelings they're having, right? Now, somewhere after kindergarten, we lose that. And it's in the season, let's start working. They don't get a chance to share it. In your story, with your student, you have to use the journal right away at the start of class. In the classes I teach in middle school, I start every class with, does anybody have any joys, successes, worries, or sorrows you would like to share? And we start with that every class. And we take about 5 minutes just to go over joys, and it could be winning their soccer game, something else, academics, and we talk about worries and sorrows, right? And the one that always gets all the kids is if someone says, my dog has cancer, my dog had a red car, and everybody consolidates around the grief, right? We do that at the start of our class. In our group, before we start doing anything group, I say, okay, points every time we've done it, right? Now, a lot of this audience is good because a lot of you are in teaching, right? Most people that go into education probably have some good experiences, or maybe they want to make up for some headwinds. That's possible too, right? The negative ones, do they carry a lot of weight? Yes. The positive ones mean a lot too. I could not spell my way out of a paper bag. I don't know verbs, I don't know grammar. Hopeless. But in third grade, our teacher was talking about similes, Miss Hunter. And Miss Hunter said, for instance, I could say that Craig's eyes are as blue as the ocean. And I fell in love with Miss Hunter. I was like, we're going to be me and you, we're going to be on the beach, I'm so in love. Right? Now that's the only grammar thing I ever remembered was similes. That and dessert has two S's. Because I really like desserts. So dessert is two E's, it's double your pleasure. But in those positive things we go on. And our children, the first thing they need is positive messages. I like to think for the weight of one negative, they need 10 positives. 10 motivation. I like to have nicknames for kids, right? Whatever it is. I see one kid he absolutely loves. Well, one time I was showing him, I said, oh, that was kind of a pinhead. And he said, I'm a pinhead. And he actually loved it. And that's his nickname. Now you would think that's like, that the kid actually loves it, calls himself, and just thinks it's hysterical. And we're like, that's nice, right? So it's having some nice nicknames. There's a Hungarian proverb that goes, a child with many names is well loved. Right? So lots of positives, nicknames, negative, positive, negative ratio. They did some research on ADHD boys, 5th graders. If you want them to change their behavior, actually want to change it, not just changes. There's a big difference between me being a monkey that knows how to press buttons, but actually wanting to change my behavior. The question was, how often should you use positive reinforcement? Often negative. What do you think they found? Ratio. 80-20. Which one's 80? Positive. Right? Now, for a lot of our kids, they do 80% negative. Right? And that happens a whole lot. So it's really trying to accentuate the positive using positives. For parents also, I was talking about, and even sometimes teachers, affirming language. If you're saying idiot, retard at home, does that kid have much of a chance? No. So watching language. Secondly, sharing emotions. We talked about the journal is one way to do that. A couple other quick points about it. First, get to the parents' breathe first. If you can help the parent breathe a little bit, get to their emotions, you have a much better chance of helping the child. For some of our kids, their behavior just is. It's neurologically based, right? So if you're hyperactive, am I going to have a hard time sitting still? Yeah. Now, if I'm feeling pretty frustrated, and like I can't figure out this reading again, and I just saw another kid close his book and say, finish, and I'm on page 2, could I be a little restless in the classroom? You bet. I wish I had a meter that could tell us, well, that behavior was because of Asperger's, or this behavior was because of ADHD. That behavior is emotions. We need to spend more time on the emotions. That would be wonderful, but we don't. So you always have to sort of assume maybe there's both. Sometimes a rock is a rock. Sometimes it's not. I had a boy that was taking driver's ed. He missed like 3 times in a row with Asperger's. His mom thought for sure it was a time management issue, an ADD issue, right? Finally, after the 3rd time of missing the class, she said, what's really going on? And he said, well, I'm in a group of 4 other kids in the car, and I'm so afraid if I drive and make a mistake, it will teach me about it. And she said, that's cool. Let's go to AAA. You can have your own private lesson. And he let me drive. Now, having Asperger's and not doing nonverbal well, he got several tickets for going the wrong way on one-way streets in the first 6 months. But he's a monk, and he's still driving today. But he needed to get to those emotions. I also like to think about fly fishing. If any of you fly fish or come to have the joy of coming to Colorado to fly fish, dealing with kids and their emotions, you just put it out there. You're just kind of throwing it out, see what you get. Philippe, the journal gives kids a chance to write a little bit. Then you can look at it. It takes time. It's not all spontaneous. Parents can use the journal idea with teenagers at home. That's a great idea. I have an 18-year-old son. The texting is sometimes the greatest way to communicate. Finishing up, we're pushing awareness all the time and problem solving. Now, the next couple pages on the handout, we're not going to review the slide totally, but the idea is social goals. I like all my kids to have social goals to work with. What is your goal for my group? What is your goal in your classroom?
daughter, student, what could the journal look like? What are the many ways that you could use it to push both academics and obviously the emotional wellness? Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. And feel enriched yourself. So we talked about what's it feel like to be the teacher, the therapist, psychologist. I treasure every moment I get from kids. And in the handout, for those of you who don't have it, one of my favorite examples, I took my junior high group camping at the end of the summer. We were sitting around a campfire. We were talking about what we learned that summer. And this one young man, Anthony, who was so socially neglected, but finally made friends. He looked at me and he said, I learned that I don't need you anymore. I have my friends. And I was like, thank you very much.